Hello, everyone. My name is Ben Cushing, president of the New Hampshire Association of Realtors, and I'm really excited to be joined today by Dr. Max Latona, the executive director of the Center of Ethics and Society at St. A's College down in Manchester. We've been working with Max in the center over the last couple of years or so, hosting two forums for realtors called the Housing We Need. I was able to attend one in Plymouth and one in Manchester, very well attended and some great discussion. And we talk about the state's affordability and inventory crisis at those sessions. And as realtors, we all have our own sense of what the crisis looks like in our day-to-day business. And most of all, we have seen the report that's just been issued by the New Hampshire Housing, which talks about today we have more than 23,000 units that were behind in demand. And the shortfall could grow to 60,000 units by the end of 2030 and potentially 90,000 units behind demand by 2040, which is hard to believe. Part of the obstacle in meeting this demand, as we know, is restrictive zoning in some of our communities. And that's why we've asked Max to join us here today. The Center of Ethics in Society has created a tool. This is called the New Hampshire Zoning Atlas. I've been able to see it a little bit. And I'm really excited to have Max here to talk to us about it because it's going to be a tool in our toolbox that will be very beneficial to us. So Max is here to help us better understand the issues as it affects municipalities around the state. So with that said, I'm going to hand it over to Max and let him describe the genesis of the Zoning Atlas, exactly what it is and how it can help us as we attack the inventory crisis in New Hampshire. So Max, thank you very much for joining me this morning and take it away.
Okay, thank you, Ben. Thank you very much for having me on to talk about something that, frankly, I'm very excited about, and along with a lot of other people who help with this project. Before I go any further, I do want to thank your organization, New Hampshire Realtors, for helping to support this. From the very beginning, when we started talking about this project now 16 months ago, you guys caught wind of it and we're fully in support and we're excited about it. So we appreciate that because without the support of your organization and a few others, we couldn't have done this. So, I'm excited to talk about the Atlas and what it means and where it came from. So early on in this whole process, we became aware that one of the big problems in the affordable housing crisis is the way in which our communities are zoning out the smaller, more affordable type of homes that so many people in New Hampshire need. There are a lot of people, nonprofit, for-profit developers that want to build homes, but they can't. And the reason they can't is that there's something restricting them. And that restriction is what we just referred to as restrictive zoning. So in trying to talk to communities about zoning and about the problems of restrictive zoning, we realized we're talking about something that people don't even really understand in the first place. So how can we point out the issues or problems with it if it's not even clear what the thing is for them? So with that said, about a year and a half ago, we had an inspirational talk at the center as part of one of our Housing We Need events. And it was a woman named Sarah Bronin. She came up from Connecticut, where they had built this zoning atlas for Connecticut. And she went on to show how that atlas had been used countless times by policymakers and advocates to propose new changes in zoning in communities across the state, including for Connecticut. If I recall, they just began to legalize ADUs, which of course New Hampshire's already done. But so that tool became an incredibly powerful tool for people in communities and stakeholders across the state to make changes. And we said, you know what? By golly, that sounds like a good idea. Let's do that ourselves. And lo and behold, then in the spring of this year, we have now what we could call the New Hampshire Zoning Atlas. It's a comprehensive database and visual graphic that shows all of the zoning, at least the housing related zoning. There's other types of zoning, housing related zoning in every community and every district of every community. Now here's the main thing. What are we hoping we're going to achieve with this? And I'd say the first thing is what I alluded to earlier, which is understanding. So we agreed early on that this zoning atlas is not going to be a policy proposal. It's not going to be an advocacy proposal. It's a tool for understanding, a tool for our communities and the community leaders, a tool for our state leaders, our policymakers, researchers, developers, academics, planners, all the people in the state who have an interest in this to understand our zoning. So that's the first thing. We think without understanding, we can't take action. But we do hope, second, that with this tool now and the understanding, we can have an informed conversation across the state. And by that, I mean in each community, but also across communities and regions and at the State House about what our zoning is, how it's impacting our housing supply, how it's impacting our housing affordability, and what we need to do to make some adjustments. And, Ben, I'll say, I'm not one of the people who think all zoning is evil. I actually think there's a place for some forms of zoning, keeping factories out of residential neighborhoods, But I got to be honest with you, when I see that a community requires 10 acres as a minimum lot size for a single family home, I'm horrified. Like, there are people out there who are our own sons and daughters or our own aged parents who need a home to live in. They can't purchase a home on a 10-acre lot. I mean, it's ridiculous. So I think there's clearly some things that we need to do to change. And so the second thing we want to do with this atlas is produce that conversation. And in order to help that happen, we came out with our first sort of set of findings that kind of what we think point out some of the major obvious ways in which our zoning is impacting housing. And I'll briefly mention them, but I can tell the audience how they can get more detail on them in a moment. But one of our first initial findings is about single family homes on small lots, what we call starter homes. These are the bread and butter of a young family trying to raise a family, establish roots in the community, build equity. Well, guess what, people? In New Hampshire, it's really hard across the state to build starter homes. Most communities have prohibited. And you might say, well, how do they prohibit them? Well, it's very simple. By requiring larger lots, whether it's 4 or 5 acres or even more sometimes, for a single family home, they've basically raised the cost of those homes for their community because those homes are going to be more expensive to build, if only because the land is more expensive, and they're going to be unaffordable for people. And so you can't have those small starter homes in those communities. So where are people going to do that? So that's number one, is that only 16% of the buildable land in the state allows small lot single family. That's an incredibly low number for what is a really basic unit of need for people in New Hampshire. So that's one. Second, we realized that actually the story is even worse for duplexes, as you can imagine, or 2-family homes, which again are oftentimes a good starter home for young couples who also can rent out the other side. They can start to build some equity. Well, guess what? Only 11% of the state permits duplexes to be built. So that's a shockingly low number. And by the way, I'll just say that a lot of the places where they'll permit it are places where people aren't living and working, because if they're further away from the job centers. So third is that you think about multifamily homes, particularly 5+ families, or what we call workforce housing. Small lot workforce housing, again, very difficult to build across New Hampshire. So thinking about those three things, and the numbers there are 22% of the buildable land. And again, a low number, although it's a little higher than the duplexes. So you put those together, single family, duplexes, 5+ family, really hard to build on smaller lots. So therefore, more land needs to be bought and purchased. These are going to be larger units in order to give a greater return to the developer, and it's going to be really difficult to find them. So it's squeezing out a lot of people from our community and making housing really expensive. Just a few other findings we have. We found that ADUs, so in New Hampshire, of course, we have this legislation from 2016 that prohibits communities from banning ADUs. They have to allow them in some form or other, although they give them some discretion in how they do that. Well, that's a good thing, because what we see is across New Hampshire, something like 95% of our buildable land permits ADUs in one form or other, which is great. But the problem is communities take advantage of that flexibility sometimes. And in this case, sometimes they'll have very high parking requirements for ADUs. And I know better. I'll give you an example. My father wanted to build an accessory dwelling unit in the garage in the back of his property in Manchester, and he was all set to do it so my sister could live there, who actually had a heart transplant. And yet he could not do it because they could not figure out how to add 2 parking spaces to the property, 2 additional parking spaces to accommodate the law governing ADUs. And that's an example where parking, my sister doesn't have 2 cars. She only had 1 car. In fact, she didn't even need a car because my parents had 2 cars. So yeah, that's an example where parking requirements are sometimes causing a restriction in the development of ADUs. And then finally, I'll say manufactured housing. Fortunately, many communities across New Hampshire do permit manufactured housing, but they find different ways to restrict it, whether by not allowing it on individual lots or in manufactured parks. So those are some initial findings that we had, which illustrated to us how zoning is impacting our housing supply and housing shortage in a real material way. So now the final question is, well, what do people do with this information? Well, what we hope is that communities will say, look at that. Not only are we in our community maybe doing some of these things that these findings are showing, but it turns out the communities all around us are doing the same thing. So no longer can we say, you know what, we want to preserve the rural character of our community. Let the next town over build these homes, because every other town is doing the same thing. So hopefully this atlas, these findings will stimulate that conversation, that self-reflection amongst all of us in our communities to make us aware of what this zoning is doing and how we need to make some adjustments. So I'll stop there. I said a lot, but as you can see, I'm very excited and passionate about this.
Well, and that's what I'm going to say. Having met you now a few times, your passion is awesome. And just because I have the voice as the state president right now, I will speak for all of our members. We're very excited to play a very small part in, backing you guys in doing this and all this work that's been done. So a couple of questions that I do have for you is, zoning changes will happen in our communities. And when these things are passed, when will the atlas be updated, if at all, which I'm assuming it would be, and how often type of a thing would an update be?
Great question, Ben. We're committed to keeping the atlas fresh, updated, and generating new content about how our zoning is impacting housing. So we expect this to be a tool for a very long time. And in order for that to be true, we need to make sure it's updated, as you pointed out. So, in New Hampshire, every spring, communities can make changes to their zoning. And what we've determined is that we're going to be committed to updating the atlas annually, so that the zoning will be up to date as of June 1st in each year. So our plan is at this point, funding and manpower provided, to go ahead and update it this summer with changes, which we don't think is going to be anywhere near as difficult as putting the atlas together in the first place, right? It's just a matter of going to some of the town websites and contacting clerks and so on and getting the changes that we need to make. And then what we're going to do, which is exciting, is actually keep the old data set from 2022, have the new data set from 2023, and so on every year following, so that researchers can look and say, look at what changes are being made, not only say because of the atlas, but because of what's happening in our state. And then they can show and see how it's impacted communities. So if community A has actually reduced their minimum lot size and community B didn't, well, what happened to community in terms of their school and how many children attend the school, in terms of their housing supply, in terms of their housing costs, and many other things that we can measure with that kind of data. So we're excited about the atlas as a tool for researchers, helping us to understand over time how our housing and our zoning is impacted by restrictive zoning. So
that's great. That's awesome. But last question, how does someone access the atlas?
Oh, good. Great question. Okay. So the simple answer is nhzoningatlas.org. So it's pretty simple, nhzoningatlas, all one word, .org. And that'll take you to the college web site and web page for the atlas, which has its own, all of the resources that they'll need.
Well, we'll be sure to get out to all of our members the website and the email address I can't thank you enough. And I really appreciate your time today and your passion. And for the over 7,000 members of the New Hampshire Realtor community, we're very grateful for all the work that not only you, but your team, the students have done in putting this atlas together to be, not only a tool for us as realtors, but for community members as a whole here in New Hampshire. So I can't thank you enough, my friend, and I look forward to seeing you soon, I'm sure.
Thank you very much, Ben. And thank you to the whole realtor community for supporting this atlas and for being ambassadors of the atlas and sharing it with others that they know. So thank you very much.